In 1962, a military transport plane lifted off from an airbase in Nevada carrying 14 personnel and equipment classified as experimental communications apparatus. The flight plan indicated a routine transfer to Edwards Air Force Base. A journey of less than 2 hours. The aircraft never arrived. No distress call was transmitted. No wreckage was ever found. And for 53 years, the official record stated simply, lost due to mechanical failure. Then, in 2015, a batch of declassified documents emerged, and the story changed completely. Flight designations aren't random. They follow strict protocols catalogued in databases that track every aircraft movement across military and civilian airspace. When a plane vanishes, the paperwork doesn't. It accumulates. Investigation reports, radar logs, witness statements, fuel calculations. These files sit in archives sealed under national security provisions, waiting. Sometimes they stay buried forever, but occasionally, decades later, someone stamps a release order and the truth slips out in fragments. What follows are 10 flights that disappeared under circumstances the public was never meant to understand. Each one left behind a trail of redacted documents, inexplicable data, and questions that authorities refuse to answer, until now. The first case involves Eastern Airlines Flight 212, though you won't find it listed under mysterious disappearances in any mainstream account. Officially, it crashed during a thunderstorm in North Carolina in 1974, killing 72 people. The investigation blamed pilot error and poor weather. But a set of air traffic control transcripts declassified in 2003 revealed something the original report never mentioned. In the final 3 minutes before impact, the aircraft's transponder signal split into 2 distinct radar returns, separated by nearly 400 feet vertically. Both signals moved in perfect synchronization. Then, abruptly, one disappeared. The other crashed moments later. Air traffic controllers on duty that night reported the anomaly immediately. Their supervisor ordered them to amend their logs, citing equipment malfunction. But the radar data preserved on magnetic tape showed no signs of technical failure. The dual return persisted across multiple tracking stations, each confirming the same impossible geometry. One controller, interviewed decades after retirement, described it as watching 2 planes fly in formation, except there was only supposed to be one. He was told never to discuss it again. The tapes were seized by federal investigators and vanished into classification. When they finally surfaced, the accompanying analysis had been entirely redacted. You're probably wondering how a single aircraft generates 2 radar signatures. The official explanation involves atmospheric reflection, a phenomenon where radar waves bounce off temperature inversions and create ghost images. It happens, but those reflections don't maintain precise altitude separation. They don't move in lockstep, and they certainly don't vanish seconds before a crash while the primary signal continues descending. The data suggests something else was in the air that night, something tracking the doomed flight with eerie precision right up until the moment of impact. That case set a pattern. Over the following decades, similar incidents accumulated in classified files, each one involving aircraft that disappeared or crashed under circumstances that defied easy explanation. Most remained hidden until archival reviews forced their release. Some emerged through freedom of information requests. Others leaked through retired personnel willing to break decades of silence. What links them isn't conspiracy, it's documentation. Hard evidence that the official narrative was incomplete or, in some cases, entirely fabricated. The second flight on this list never had a public face. Trans-Meridian Airlines doesn't exist in any commercial aviation registry. It appears only in a single declassified CIA memo from 1978, referencing Project Shoal and a flight path originating in Guam. The memo describes a reconnaissance aircraft carrying sensitive imaging equipment on a nighttime mission over the South Pacific. The plane reported normal operations for the first 4 hours. Then, according to intercepted radio traffic, the pilot transmitted a message that was never explained. We have visual confirmation. Object is maintaining parallel course at our altitude, requesting immediate instructions. There was no response logged. 30 seconds later, the aircraft's emergency locator beacon activated. It transmitted for 11 minutes, then went silent. No search and rescue operation was ever publicly acknowledged. The memo notes only that all personnel are presumed lost and that recovery of equipment is not feasible. What makes this case particularly unsettling is the metadata. The radio transmission was logged at a specific timestamp and triangulated to a position 300 miles southeast of Wake Island. Weather records from that night show clear skies and calm seas. The emergency beacon signal was strong, consistent, and then ceased without degradation, as if someone switched it off. Standard procedure would demand an immediate air-sea rescue response. None was launched. Instead, a naval vessel was quietly diverted to the area 2 days later. Its mission logs remain classified. The crew was debriefed under secrecy agreements that, according to one sailor who spoke anonymously in 2011, included threats of prosecution if they ever discussed what they recovered. Here's where it gets stranger. In 1982, 4 years after the incident, a fisherman operating near the same coordinates pulled up debris in his nets. Among the wreckage was a metal plate stamped with a serial number that matched, according to later research, a component used exclusively in high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft. He reported the find to local authorities. Within 48 hours, US. Officials arrived, confiscated the debris and classified the fisherman's report. He was compensated for his silence. The payment came from a Department of Defense black budget account that, when audited years later, showed no record of the transaction. The third case involves a commercial flight that everyone heard about, but nobody understood. In 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 suffered catastrophic structural failure and crashed into a mountain, killing 520 people. It remains the deadliest single aircraft disaster in history. The official cause was a faulty repair to the rear pressure bulkhead, a conclusion supported by physical evidence and engineering analysis. But declassified US military communications from that day tell a different story, or at least they hint at one. At the time of the crash, the aircraft was tracked by multiple radar installations, including a US Air Force base in Japan. Standard protocol. But the radio logs show something unusual. 17 minutes before the aircraft lost control, an air defense operator noted an unidentified high-speed contact approaching the Boeing 747's flight path. The contact closed to within 2 miles, then veered off. 8 minutes later, the plane's vertical stabilizer separated from the fuselage. Japanese investigators concluded the separation resulted from metal fatigue and explosive decompression. They found no evidence of external impact. Yet the radar data, quietly archived by the US military, was never shared with the investigation. When it was finally released under declassification review, the accompanying analysis had been stripped out. Only the raw tracking data remained. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing unusual lights in the sky that evening. Several described a bright, fast-moving object trailing the aircraft before it began its descent. These accounts were dismissed as misidentifications of the plane's navigation lights or debris. But the consistency of the descriptions, combined with the unexplained radar contact, raises questions that were never formally addressed. The US military maintained that the contact was likely a false return or a misidentified civilian aircraft. No such aircraft was ever identified. The radar track simply ends, labelled unknown. What ties these incidents together isn't a single explanation, it's the response. In each case, information was suppressed, investigations were curtailed, and witnesses were silenced. The declassified documents don't provide answers. They provide glimpses, fragments of a larger picture that someone decided the public didn't need to see. And these are just the first 3. The pattern deepens as we move forward into cases where the aircraft didn't just vanish from the sky, they vanished from history itself, erased so thoroughly that even their flight numbers were reassigned. The 4th case is perhaps the most disturbing because it involves a plane that, according to all official records, never existed. In 1991, a series of maintenance logs surfaced during a routine audit at a military airfield in Arizona. The logs detailed servicing and fuel records for a C-130 transport aircraft with a tail number that didn't match any registered military asset. The entries spanned 6 months, ending abruptly in March of that year. The final entry noted, Aircraft departed for classified operation. No return scheduled. That was it. No flight plan, no destination, no follow-up. When auditors questioned the discrepancy, they were told the logs were filed in error and that the tail number was a clerical mistake. But the entries were too detailed, too consistent. Fuel quantities, maintenance hours, parts replaced, crew names, everything you'd expect from a real aircraft. And then there were the crew names themselves. 5 of the 8 individuals listed were confirmed to be real military personnel. 2 of them had died in separate, unrelated incidents within a year of the final log entry. The remaining 3 refused to comment when contacted by independent researchers years later. One eventually admitted off the record that he had flown missions that didn't happen. What was this ghost plane doing for 6 months? The fuel logs suggest long-range flights consistent with operations deep into foreign or hostile airspace. The parts replaced included avionics upgrades and radar-absorbent coatings, materials used in stealth modifications. If this aircraft was real and if it was operating under deep classification, then its disappearance wasn't an accident. It was an ending, planned, executed, and erased. The 5th case brings us to the Arctic Circle, where the boundaries between airspace and secrecy blur into permanent winter. In December 1987, a Norwegian fishing vessel reported seeing an aircraft descending rapidly through thick cloud cover near Svalbard, a remote archipelago halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole. The crew described the plane as large, 4-engined and flying without navigation lights. They watched it drop below the cloud base, level off briefly, then disappear behind a ridge of ice-covered mountains. No distress signal was transmitted, no wreckage was ever found, but 3 days later, Soviet reconnaissance satellites detected unusual heat signatures in the exact area where the aircraft was last seen. The signatures persisted for over an hour, consistent with burning aviation fuel, then faded completely. NATO was notified. Search and rescue teams were dispatched. They found nothing. No debris field, no oil slicks, no bodies. Just undisturbed snow and ice stretching for miles in every direction. The official conclusion was that the fishermen had misidentified a civilian cargo plane that later landed safely in Murmansk. But no such flight was ever logged. And the heat signatures recorded by Soviet satellites were classified immediately, buried under layers of Cold War intelligence protocols that remain sealed to this day. Years later, a retired Norwegian intelligence officer claimed that the incident involved a covert NATO surveillance flight monitoring Soviet submarine activity. He suggested the plane had landed on a frozen lake, offloaded its cargo, and was then deliberately scuttled to prevent capture. The heat signatures, he said, were from controlled demolition charges, not a crash. If true, that would explain the absence of wreckage. It would also mean the crew either escaped via pre-positioned extraction or were left behind to die in the Arctic cold. Neither possibility was ever investigated publicly. The 6th case shifts south to the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, where an entire squadron vanished in broad daylight. In March 1993, 5 Pakistani Air Force jets were conducting a routine training exercise off the coast of Karachi. Weather conditions were clear, visibility was unlimited. The formation was tracked continuously by ground radar as it flew a standard patrol route along the maritime boundary. Then, at 11:42 a.m., all 5 aircraft disappeared from radar simultaneously. The controller tried to re-establish contact. Nothing. No mayday calls, no transponder signals, no emergency beacons. The jets were simply gone. A massive search operation was launched within minutes. Naval vessels, helicopters, and reconnaissance aircraft scoured the area for days. They found a single piece of debris, a section of wing panel bearing the markings of one of the missing jets. It was floating alone 30 miles from the last known position. No other wreckage, no bodies, no fuel slicks, nothing else. The official report attributed the incident to a catastrophic mid-air collision followed by water impact that pulverized the aircraft. But pilots and engineers who reviewed the findings pointed out a glaring problem. A mid-air collision severe enough to destroy 5 jets would have scattered debris across miles of ocean. The fact that only one small piece was recovered suggested something else entirely. Classified Pakistani military files, partially leaked in 2009, referenced atmospheric anomaly and possible electromagnetic interference event in connection with the incident. The terminology was vague, deliberately so, but it hinted at something beyond mechanical failure or pilot error. Some speculated the jets had flown into a localized area of intense electromagnetic disturbance, perhaps generated by experimental weapons testing or geophysical phenomena. Others suggested a deliberate shoot-down, either by mistake or as part of a covert operation that was later covered up. What makes this case particularly haunting is the silence of the families. The pilots' relatives were reportedly pressured into accepting the official explanation without question. Compensation was provided swiftly, far exceeding standard military death benefits. And within a year, all 5 pilots were quietly removed from official Air Force records as if they had never existed. The 7th case takes us back to the United States, where a domestic flight became a ghost before it ever left the ground. In April 1999, a regional airline scheduled a late-night cargo flight from Memphis to Dallas. The aircraft, a twin-engine turboprop, was loaded with medical supplies and commercial freight. The crew consisted of 2 experienced pilots, both with spotless safety records. The flight was logged, fueled and cleared for departure, but it never took off. At least, not according to any official record. Here's where it gets strange. Multiple witnesses at the airport reported seeing the aircraft taxi to the runway, receive clearance, and depart shortly after midnight. One ground crew member even logged the takeoff time in his personal notebook. Yet the airline's official manifest shows the flight as cancelled due to mechanical issues. The aircraft's logbook contains no entry for that night, and the 2 pilots reported for duty the following morning as if nothing had happened, claiming they never flew. When confronted with the witness accounts, the airline issued a terse statement attributing the confusion to scheduling errors and miscommunication. But the ground crew member who logged the takeoff was fired within the week for unrelated performance issues. The witnesses were never formally interviewed, and the aircraft in question was quietly retired from service 3 months later, sold to a private buyer whose identity remains undisclosed. Independent investigators who tried to track the flight found something even more disturbing. Radio transmissions recorded that night by amateur aviation enthusiasts included a brief exchange between Memphis Tower and an unidentified aircraft using the exact call sign assigned to the cancelled flight. The pilot reported normal climb and requested a frequency change for en route control. The tower acknowledged, then silence. The recording was submitted to the FAA, which responded that no such transmission existed in their archives and that the recording was likely a hoax or misattribution. But the voice on the recording matched one of the pilots, and the background noise was consistent with a turboprop cockpit environment. If the flight never happened, who was transmitting? And if it did happen, where did the plane go after leaving Memphis airspace? The 8th case brings us to the edge of space itself, where the line between aviation and something else begins to dissolve. In 2002, a high-altitude research balloon launched from New Mexico was tracked ascending to over 100,000 feet. The balloon carried scientific instruments designed to measure cosmic radiation and atmospheric composition. It was monitored continuously by telemetry systems on the ground. At 102,000 feet, the telemetry feed began transmitting erratic data. Temperature readings spiked impossibly high. Pressure sensors registered values that defied the known atmospheric profile. Then the signal cut out entirely. Recovery teams were dispatched to the projected landing zone. They found the balloon's payload container, intact but heavily damaged. The instruments inside were scorched, their circuitry fused as if exposed to intense heat or electromagnetic energy. But the balloon's fabric envelope was never recovered. It had simply vanished. Analysis of the final telemetry data revealed something unsettling. In the seconds before the signal was lost, the instruments detected a brief, intense radio frequency burst originating from directly above the balloon. The frequency was outside the normal range of terrestrial or solar sources. When researchers attempted to trace the origin, they found that similar bursts had been recorded by other high-altitude experiments dating back to the 1970s, always at extreme altitudes, always followed by equipment failure or loss of signal. The official explanation was that the balloon had encountered a rare atmospheric plasma phenomenon, possibly related to sprite lightning or upper atmospheric electrical discharge. But plasma events leave distinct ionization signatures. None were detected. And the scorching pattern on the instrument suggested a directed energy source, not a diffuse natural event. What was up there? What interacted with that balloon at the edge of space? And why has every similar incident been quietly archived without further investigation? The ninth case is perhaps the most chilling because it involves not an aircraft, but the people who tried to investigate one. In 2006, a team of aerospace engineers and journalists embarked on a research expedition to the Sahara Desert, following reports of wreckage from an unidentified aircraft spotted by satellite. The wreckage was located in a remote area of Algeria, far from any known flight paths or military installations. The team obtained permits, hired local guides, and set out with GPS coordinates provided by an anonymous source. They reached the site after 3 days of travel. What they found was unlike any known aircraft design. The wreckage was partially buried in sand, but visible sections showed smooth metallic construction with no visible rivets, seams, or welds. The material was lightweight, yet extraordinarily strong. One team member described it as impossibly thin but unbreakable. They took photographs, collected samples, and documented the site extensively. On the return journey, the team was intercepted by Algerian military forces. They were detained, questioned, and eventually released, but all their equipment was confiscated. Cameras, samples, notes, everything. When they returned home, they found their computers had been remotely accessed and all digital files related to the expedition had been deleted. Backup drives were corrupted. Cloud storage accounts were wiped. 2 members of the team later reported being followed. One received anonymous phone calls warning him to stop discussing the expedition. Another found his home broken into, though nothing was stolen. The journalist who organised the trip published a brief article about the experience, but it was pulled from the publication's website within 48 hours. No explanation was given. The wreckage they found remains in the desert, presumably still buried under shifting sands. No follow-up expedition has been attempted, and the people who saw it firsthand have been effectively silenced, not through force, but through the systematic erasure of everything they documented. These cases don't fit the narrative we're comfortable with. They suggest a world where aircraft don't just crash or get lost. They're removed, hidden, erased from existence along with anyone who gets too close to the truth. The technology, the locations, the circumstances all point to something operating beyond the boundaries of conventional aviation. And the response always the same: deny, suppress, and silence. The 10th and final case takes us back to where many of these stories begin, the classified hangar. But this time we're not talking about recovered wreckage or foreign technology. We're talking about something that was built, tested, and then deliberately destroyed by the very people who created it. In 1989, a defense contractor in Nevada completed work on an experimental reconnaissance aircraft designated Project Aurora. The program was born from Cold War paranoia and funded through black budget allocations that never appeared in official records. The aircraft was designed to fly at altitudes exceeding 100,000 feet, far beyond the reach of conventional radar or missile systems. Its propulsion system was unlike anything in the public aviation arsenal. Instead of traditional jet engines, it used a pulse detonation wave engine, creating a distinctive sound described by witnesses as a rhythmic, thunderous roar. Satellite thermal imaging from the period shows unexplained heat signatures moving at hypersonic speeds across restricted airspace in the southwestern United States. Seismologists in California and Nevada recorded mysterious sonic booms that couldn't be attributed to any known aircraft or natural phenomenon. The booms occurred in regular patterns, always at night, always over the same flight corridors. Then, in early 1990, everything stopped. The booms ceased. The heat signatures disappeared, and Project Aurora was officially declared to have never existed. When aviation researchers filed Freedom of Information requests, they were told no such program had ever been funded or developed. Documents that had previously referenced Aurora-related contracts were either redacted beyond recognition or missing entirely from archives. Engineers who had worked on the project found their employment records altered, their job titles changed to generic descriptions that erased any connection to advanced aircraft development. One former contractor attempted to speak publicly about the program. He described the aircraft as capable of sustained flight at Mach 6, with a design so radical it rendered all existing air defense systems obsolete. Days after his interview aired on a regional radio station, he recanted everything, claiming he had been mistaken and confused about his work history. He refused all further contact with journalists. But the strangest part of the Aurora story isn't the secrecy. It's what happened to the prototypes. According to multiple sources who worked at the Nevada test facility, at least 3 fully functional aircraft were built. All 3 were destroyed in controlled demolitions within weeks of the program's termination. Not mothballed, not stored, not repurposed, destroyed. Witnesses described seeing the aircraft cut into sections, melted down and buried in unmarked locations on government land. The engine components were reportedly crushed and mixed with concrete before being sealed in underground vaults. Why would a government invest billions in developing breakthrough technology only to erase it completely? The official silence suggests the aircraft worked too well. It demonstrated capabilities that would have required public acknowledgement of propulsion systems decades ahead of known science. Deploying it would have raised questions that couldn't be answered without revealing research programs the public was never meant to know about. So, they buried it. And with it, they buried the future of hypersonic flight, at least the version that might have been shared with the world. What remains are echoes, unexplained booms, thermal ghosts in satellite data, and the testimonies of people who saw something that officially never was. These 10 cases form a pattern so consistent it becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Aircraft appear, demonstrate capabilities beyond conventional explanation, and then vanish. The wreckage is removed. The witnesses are silenced. The data is erased, and the official response is always the same: denial, followed by suppression, followed by silence. But why? What connects a World War II bomber in the Sahara to a hypersonic spy plane in Nevada? What links a research balloon at the edge of space to a commercial airliner's impossible maneuver over the Pacific? The answer lies not in the technology itself, but in what that technology represents. Each of these cases reveals something beyond the boundaries of publicly acknowledged science. Propulsion systems without visible engines, materials that defy analysis, flight characteristics that violate known physics. If any of these cases were fully investigated and explained, it would require admitting that our understanding of aerospace technology is incomplete. Or worse, that it's been deliberately limited. The suppression isn't about protecting national security. It's about maintaining a controlled narrative of technological progress. A narrative where advancements happen gradually, predictably, and always within the boundaries of what we're told is possible. But the evidence suggests otherwise. It suggests that breakthroughs happen in darkness, are tested in secret, and are hidden when they threaten to expose how much has been kept from public knowledge. The technology exists. The question is, who controls it, and why we're not allowed to know? Consider the implications if even one of these cases were proven beyond doubt. If the Sahara wreckage were recovered and analysed publicly. If the Pacific Airliner's impossible ascent were explained with physics we don't teach in universities. If Project Aurora's remains were excavated and examined by independent scientists. The revelation wouldn't just change aviation history, it would shatter the foundation of trust between governments and citizens. It would prove that entire fields of science have been classified, that technologies capable of transforming society have been locked away, and that the future we could have had was stolen before it could arrive. That's why the silence persists. That's why witnesses are discredited, evidence is destroyed, and investigations are shut down before they can begin. The cost of truth is too high for those who benefit from its absence, but the cost of suppression is even higher. Every erased aircraft, every buried prototype, every silenced engineer represents knowledge lost to humanity. Advancements in propulsion that could have revolutionized transportation, materials that could have transformed manufacturing, energy systems that could have ended dependence on fossil fuels. All of it hidden, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. We live in a world where the impossible is filed away and forgotten, where the boundaries of progress are decided not by the limits of human ingenuity, but by the interests of those who control the narrative. And the most terrifying part is how effective the system has become. How easily the extraordinary is made to disappear, how quickly the truth is rewritten into myth. These 10 cases are not the end of the story. They're fragments of a much larger picture, glimpses through a curtain that's meant to stay closed. Somewhere in locked hangars and sealed vaults, in classified archives and erased hard drives, the evidence still exists. The aircraft that never crashed, the technologies that were never developed, the futures that were never allowed to happen, they're waiting, not to be discovered, but to be acknowledged. And until that happens, we'll continue to live in a world where the sky holds secrets we're not permitted to know, where flight itself is less about freedom and more about control, and where the greatest achievements of human innovation remain hidden in the dark, just beyond the edge of what we're allowed to see. The pattern is undeniable now. 10 cases spanning decades and continents, each one following the same trajectory. Discovery, documentation, suppression, erasure. The methods vary, but the outcome never does. What was seen becomes unseen. What was known becomes forbidden. And those who witnessed it are left with nothing but memories that the world refuses to validate. This isn't about conspiracy theories or speculation. These are documented incidents with paper trails, witness testimonies, and physical evidence that existed until someone decided it shouldn't. The declassified files prove that much. They show us the questions that were asked, the investigations that were started, and the exact moment when everything stopped. Not because the answers weren't there, but because someone determined those answers were too dangerous to share. Think about what that means, not hypothetically, but practically. Right now, somewhere, there are aircraft designs that could transform global transportation. Propulsion systems that operate on principles we're told don't exist. Materials with properties that would revolutionize construction, medicine, energy production. All of it locked away, not in the distant past, but in our lifetimes. Some of these cases happened within the last 20 years. The people involved are still alive. The evidence still exists in sealed facilities. The technology is real, functional, and deliberately hidden. And the cost of that concealment extends far beyond aviation. Every suppressed breakthrough represents a future we were denied. Clean energy that could have ended climate dependence decades ago. Transportation that could have connected the world without destroying it. Medical applications derived from materials we're not allowed to study. The ripple effects are incalculable. How many problems could have been solved if these technologies had been released? How many lives could have been saved, improved, or fundamentally changed? But here's what's even more unsettling. The suppression system works because we allow it to. We've been conditioned to accept that certain knowledge is classified for our own good, that national security requires secrets, that some things are too complex or dangerous for public understanding. And maybe that's true in some cases. But these 10 incidents suggest something darker. They suggest that the secrecy isn't about protecting us. It's about protecting power structures that depend on controlled scarcity, limited access, and technological gatekeeping. When an aircraft vanishes and all evidence is erased, it's not just the machine that disappears. It's possibility itself. The moment when human innovation pushed past accepted boundaries and proved that what we thought was impossible was simply unimagined. Those moments are being stolen, catalogued, and buried in vaults where they can't inspire, can't disrupt, can't change anything. The question isn't whether these technologies exist. The declassified documents, the witness accounts, the physical evidence that briefly surfaced before being confiscated, all of it confirms they're real. The question is what we do with that knowledge. Do we accept the official explanations and move on, pretending these cases are isolated anomalies? Or do we recognize the pattern for what it is? Systematic suppression of advancement that threatens established interests. Every one of these flights carried something more valuable than cargo or passengers. They carried proof that the limits we're told to accept aren't real, that the boundaries of physics, engineering, and human capability are far beyond what we've been shown, and that somewhere someone decided we weren't ready for that truth, or more accurately, that they weren't ready to lose control of it. The wreckage is still out there, buried in deserts, sunk in oceans, locked in hangars that don't appear on any map. The witnesses are still alive, bound by secrecy agreements or fear of consequences they've seen others face. The documents exist, redacted and classified, waiting for the next declassification cycle that might reveal one more fragment of what really happened. But the technology isn't waiting. It's being used right now in programs we'll never hear about by organizations that operate beyond public oversight. And maybe that's the most important revelation of all. These cases aren't historical curiosities, they're ongoing. The same forces that erased Project Aurora are still operating today. The same methods that silenced the Sahara expedition are still in use. The pattern didn't end with the last case. It continues in real time with incidents we won't learn about until decades from now, if ever. So what happens next? The files will remain sealed, the witnesses will stay silent, the aircraft will continue to vanish, their stories reduced to footnotes in declassified documents that raise more questions than they answer. Unless something changes. Unless enough people recognize that the cost of suppression has become too high, that the future we're being denied is too valuable to leave buried. These 10 flights didn't just disappear from the sky, they were removed from history, excised from the record of human achievement, erased so thoroughly that even mentioning them invites ridicule or dismissal. But the evidence remains, scattered, redacted, hidden, but real. And as long as it exists, the truth can't be completely buried, it can only be delayed. The question is, how much longer we're willing to wait for answers that already exist, locked away in places we're not supposed to look.